Sides have launched new attacks this very morning. Iran is targeting Israel's power grid with a missile nearly striking the country's largest power station on its coast. Meanwhile, the UAE said its air defenses had intercepted 9 drones, while Saudi Arabia's defense ministry said shrapnel from an intercepted ballistic missile fell on houses in the eastern part of the kingdom. Kuwaiti officials say they stopped at least 6 drones launched from Iran. At the same time, the Israeli military said it struck a series of Hezbollah targets, including a series of gas stations across Lebanon. This comes as an influx of U.S. troops are headed to the region, something Iran's parliamentary speaker said that Tehran is closely monitoring. And back here at home, a new poll finds that Americans believe the recent military action against Iran has gone too far. The latest AP-NORC poll finds that 59% say the U.S. military efforts against Iran have been excessive. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He is a member of the Armed Services, the Homeland Security, and Judiciary Committees. Senator, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Want to hit a number of topics with you this morning, but let's, of course, start with Iran. We know you and your colleagues have been upset at the lack of communications, the lack of briefings from the administration. Talk to us your current thoughts about, yes, the possibility of a diplomatic off-ramp, but also that more and more American troops are headed to the region, certainly raising the possibility of some sort of ground strike.
As you know, Jonathan, I expressed the fear just a couple of weeks ago after emerging from one of the classified briefings that I received that we were on a path to putting our American sons and daughters on the ground in Iran. My fears are now seemingly a reality as we're sending 5,000 Marines and another 3,000 troops from the 82nd Airborne. Not enough to really secure and hold the Strait of Hormuz, but enough to be very, very costly in lives. And the comparison that I've heard recently from one of my colleagues that it's like Iwo Jima is also pretty daunting and frightening because Iwo Jima was one of our costliest and bloodiest battles of all time. So there's a harsh reality on the ground. The Iranians seem very unreceptive to any talks, not only in their public statements, but from what we've heard behind the scenes in the briefings that we've received. And the real problem here, as it was at the very beginning, is the confusion and chaos in the president's objectives. No plan, no purpose, no real exit strategy, no end game. And the harsh reality on the ground is that bombing is no way to negotiate. Bombing is no way to peace. Bombing will not achieve any of the objectives that the president's outlined, whether it's securing the enriched uranium or changing the regime or stopping the terrorist activities or destroying the missiles and drones and their production capacity. It would require troops on the ground, Americans in harm's way to accomplish those goals. And we seem to be headed down that path more really than ever before.
And the president's deadline, which he extended from earlier in the week, looms a few days out. Senator, we want to turn you now to a matter here at home, the ongoing standoff about DHS funding and, of course, TSA agents not being paid. Many have walked off the job or called in sick, and we have seen extraordinarily long security lines at the nation's airports. We should note this comes at a time, of course, of increased terror concerns, but also a significant inconvenience for Americans who are simply trying to travel for spring break, the holidays upcoming. What's the latest you have heard about where things stand? Republicans 24 hours ago were sounding a note of optimism. Hey, we think we can get the president to say yes to this deal, but it hasn't happened yet. So some anxiety is building.
There's a solution readily available, Jonathan, which is that Republicans need to get serious about paying TSA. We've proposed 8 times on the floor of the United States Senate legislation that would pay TSA and separately negotiate reforms that are absolutely necessary in ICE and CBP. we are unwilling, and I am absolutely a no on any money to be appropriated to the Department of Homeland Security without reforms. If that money includes ICE and CBP, the reforms are basically rules and practices that are routine in police departments, your police department and mine in Connecticut. And they include, for example, wearing badges and body cameras, taking off the masks, eliminating the mask sweeps, following rules that give redress to citizens when their rights are violated. These kinds of basic reforms are an absolute must for us if we're going to move forward. And Republicans seemed on the verge of accepting them. But now this latest plan is a non-starter because it would involve funding ICE and CBP, at least in part, without those reforms. And Trump has vacillated. Republicans are all over the place. They can't agree among themselves. They've changed their positions. And so they need to get their act together and be serious about these negotiations. But paying TSA is readily possible through separate legislation that would also pay as well our Coast Guard and FEMA. And it's been proposed from the very start of this crisis.
So, Senator, we know that there was a deal that John Thune had struck with Republicans and with Democrats where we would be able to pay TSA agents while this ongoing ICE, funding was negotiated. And then President Trump came in and said, oh, no, we have to also pass the SAVE Act. Is this something that to me, this is like proof positive that John Thune and the Republicans in the Senate, both House and Senate, of course, Mike Johnson, are still very beholden to Trump. Do you think as long as Trump is involved in these negotiations that you all can actually strike a deal? Beholden is a nice way of putting it. Held captive.
They've demonstrated no spine, no backbone to stand up to Trump. And the demand that we include the Save America Act, which would purge voter rolls and suppress votes, establish barriers to voting, both in access as well as in financial terms, is absolutely unacceptable and could not pass on its own right now, as John Thune recognizes. So the idea of bundling them together makes a deal absolutely impossible. Now, Trump has seemingly somewhat receded from that position, but now it may be coming back to it. We just don't know. And the shifting positions makes it impossible to have serious negotiation.
Senator, talk about the politics of this in terms of, we saw where a person, a Democrat, won even the district where Mar-a-Lago's in. And you have the picture where the president is saying that I want to change voting, which is going to not only hurt people of color who disproportionately don't have the requirements he would dictate. They never needed it. It will disenfranchise many voters that are just women that get married, on and on and on, right in Connecticut where you represent. Is not it possible that the president is really miscalculating how voters are going to look at this going into special elections and then to the midterms, saying that I want to not have any reform in terms of the ICE, when we're only talking about face masks and other things of that nature, when 2 people were killed by ICE, by the way, in Minnesota. And at the same time, I want to change how voting is. How does that speak to the average voter that you deal with?
As you well know, Reverend, the average voter is concerned about the cost of gasoline and groceries, which are skyrocketing as a result of this war. They're also rising as a result of tariffs. The idea that Americans are impervious morally or politically to what ICE has been doing in the streets of Minneapolis, but really all over the country, is absolutely wrong. I think this issue is one where morality and politics absolutely coincide. And if Americans needed any reminder, the hearings we've been conducted in the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, I'm the ranking member, just yesterday with children, American citizens, no criminal record, no wrongdoing, assaulted, dragged away from their parents, detained illegally, what has been done to children, the shooting of Renee Good, and her brothers came to testify. Their heartrending stories that all of America has seen, I think, has repulsed them on the policies of ICE and CBP. And so they well understand the reasons why we are standing strong, just as they well see that this war of, it's not even a war of choice, which implies a calculated, thoughtful decision. It's a war of impulse and whim and illusion, self-delusion. The president says he's received a present. Well, he's given Iran a present when he lifted sanctions, billions of dollars going into their coffers to fuel their war machine. America can see the contradictions and the chaos, and I think that the politics here coincides with what is actually right to do. And that is immensely inspiring, I think, to Democrats and energizing, as you just saw in Florida.
Yet another special election victory that has gone the Democrats' way, some in districts that had very heavily gone Republican just a year and a half ago. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. Senator, thank you again.